How can you better your bourbon sipping experience, learn to pick up more flavors, and start telling apart different distilleries just based on what's in your glass? Today, I will tell you what's worked for me and what I've learned from Master Distillers today on the Mash and Drum. Hey guys, welcome to today's episode. So some of the biggest questions I get is how do I pick up all those flavors in bourbon, and how can I personally get better at picking up all those flavors? Now before we dive in, I do just want to mention that there's really no wrong way to sip bourbon, whether it's mixed with Coke, on the rocks, and lemonade, or neat. As long as you're enjoying it with family and friends, it will always be the right way. But for those of you out there who want to better your sipping experience and get the most out of what's in the glass, today I will go through some tips that have personally helped me be able to pick up flavors, styles, mash bills, and telling apart one distillery from one another. Since everyone learns and enjoys their whiskey differently, I want to say that these tips are not unbreakable laws on how to drink bourbon or whiskey at all. What I want to do is guide you with some great tips that I've learned from Master Distillers and personally to maybe help you get the most out of your bourbon. So first things first, once you choose the bourbon you want to explore, you need the glass. Now there are a few different glasses that I recommend you can use for tasting. Glencairn, which is this one here, is probably the most popular, but other glasses like the Copita or Tulip glass it's called, this is the Tribeca, and the Norland glasses are also popular options. So for this video, I'm going to use the Glencairn, which allows you to get a good look at the color in the bulb of the glass. It's also easy to swirl the bourbon around to get some air in it, which we'll get to. The narrow neck of the glass right here also allows the smell to gather right under your nose when it's time to smell your bourbon without too much alcohol smell either. But I would tell anyone to try different glasses, see which one works for them, which ones do they get the most smells out of, which ones light up the senses, and from there you're off to a great start. But for me, I personally love the Glencairn, which is here, or the Copita or Tulip glass, which is basically, looks somewhat like a Glencairn, but it's basically on a stem. The Tribeca glasses are very popular as well. For me personally, I don't feel like I get the best nose out of a Tribeca. And then you have the Norland glasses, which this is the ones that all blacked out. I call this Batman's whiskey glass. These are kind of cool. You can actually tip it on its side like this. So you can't see it, but I'll throw a picture here to show you. Basically, it's a glass within another glass. So it allows the whiskey not to be affected by your hand or the warmth of your hand. So when you're actually gripping the glass, it's protected by the inner glass on the inside. But again, I would implore you to try all these glasses, see which ones you like the most. But for this video, we're gonna focus on the Glencairn. All right, so now that you have your glass and you've poured your bourbon, it's time to look at the color. Notice the color of the bourbon. Is it light? Is it dark? Does it stick to the glass? Does it run down the glass? Normally, the older the bourbon, the darker it will be, and other factors will affect the appearance or proof, what climate it could have been aged in, and whether it's non-chill filtered or not. Basically, the higher the proof, the less water was added before bottling, which will make it seem thicker and a little bit more creamy. The lighter the whiskey will usually clue you in on how young the whiskey is, a few months, 3 years, all the way to the darker bourbons that are 8 years old and above. Here are some examples. All right, guys, so I poured 3 glasses so we could take a look at some different ages. So take a look at the close-up. So starting all the way on your left, we have the youngest whiskey. This one is only about 3 years old, this bourbon. It's a younger bourbon. You can see it's light. It definitely has some good color to it, but it's definitely a little bit lighter than the other two. As you work your way to the middle glass is about a 7-year-old bourbon. So it's slightly darker than that 3-year-old. It's gotten some more color from that barrel. You can tell it's a little bit older. And then on the last one, that bourbon is about 12 years old. So that you could see all the color in there. And the bourbon all the way on the end is also non-chill filtered and barrel proof. So you could see what kind of a distinction that water, barrel proof, non-chill filtration makes in the color of a bourbon. All right, so next up we're gonna nose the glass. Now, nosing is an important part of the tasting since our sense of smell is actually stronger than our sense of taste. In fact, in a study published by the Journal of Science by Rockefeller University in 2014, they discovered that people can detect at least 1 trillion scents. Now, in an interview I did with Master Distiller Elizabeth McCall from Woodford Reserve, who was also a sensory expert for Brown-Forman, she took me through the steps to properly nose a glass of bourbon to get the most out of it, which I thought was really effective. So today we're going to be nosing some Stag Jr. All right, guys, so first step is to pass the glass under your nose from side to side and gently take some aromas in. Most importantly, do not breathe in with your mouth closed. A lot of people make this mistake because this won't allow you to pick up all those aromas. If your mouth is closed, then the only thing you're really gonna get is pretty much the aroma of alcohol. So basically what you're smelling at first is the top layers of the bourbon. The vanillas, the caramels, maybe a hint of spice and sugary sweetness. All those really good sweet flavors are there on the top of the glass just waiting for you. All right, so after you get those aromas, it's time to swirl the glass. So what you wanna do is whip some air into the glass. It's amazing what air can do to a bourbon or a whiskey. It really changes the flavors, it opens things up a little bit. So swirl your glass around a little bit. And then what you wanna do, you wanna set the rim of the glass right here, just under your nose, just above your top lip. Stick your nose in, and again with your mouth open, smell the bourbon again. Now this is where you smell or pick up the deeper layers of the bourbon, the oak presence, the dark brown sugars, dark fruits, a little bit more complexity comes out. Yes, some bourbons will be more complex than others based on age, proof, and where it was aged. Once I developed this routine of nosing a glass, it really helped me pick up flavors and aromas a lot easier. The Stag Junior just has so much sugary sweetness, but also that really nice cherry note. You get some oak presence to it. And remember, this bourbon is uncut, unfiltered, so there's a lot of flavor in there to be found. So definitely try it at home. All right, now on to the fun part, which is tasting the bourbon. Now I tried this a few different ways in order for me to pick up the different flavors I was looking for, but the one that worked best for me was taking a small sip and holding that sip right on the front in the middle of your palate without swallowing it. Does the front of my palate tingle? Is it sweet? I also slowly swirl it around my mouth and literally chew on the bourbon a bit. Chewing it allows your palate to pick up more flavors. To some of you that have been on some distillery tours, it's also known as the Kentucky Chew. Obviously, I did not want you to hear me tasting and chewing on the bourbon because it's kind of gross sounding. But after you have done this, you could swallow it and then start to taste the flavors that are left on your palate. Now your tongue is broken down into different zones where the front of your tongue is able to pick up more sweet and salty flavors, while the back of your tongue is where the sour and bitter taste buds are. Now, do flavors linger for you? Do they go away fast? Does it stick to your palate? This will allow you to appreciate the finish. Let's go for one more sip here. All right, so for Stag Junior in particular, this one for me is I am taking a sip. If you're maybe doing this along with me at home, when you're chewing on it, there's a lot of brown sugars, a lot of deep rich caramels. That cherry note is really popping a lot for me, especially on the palate. Now that finish, after you swallow what lingers, the finish is probably my favorite part of the experience. All right, so as I mentioned, the finish happens to be my favorite part of a bourbon. It's where a lot of different things can happen to make you go back to sipping that particular glass. Does it stay with you? If it lingers, that is considered a long finish. If it disappears quickly and there's really not much left going on, that's really considered a short finish. Take note of the flavors that you notice. Were there any flavors that you tasted? Was it just alcohol and burn? Was it smooth and sweet? Sometimes even after 10 to 15 seconds of swallowing a good whiskey or bourbon, other flavors pop up and appear in the finish as well. So let's go into the Stag Junior again. The finish on the Stag Junior, this particular batch, is absolutely delicious. So this is batch 12, the famous batch 12. It's 132.3 proof. The reason why I wanted to use this for an example is because when it comes to finish, you're gonna get a lot of different types. The finish on this Stag Junior is wildly different than the Stag Juniors when they first released all the way back in August of 2013. Stag Junior back then was seen as kind of a bourbon that just drank way too hot. So instead of all the sweetness I'm getting now, like what's in this bottle, on those earlier batches, you just got a lot of alcohol and heat. There wasn't a lot of flavor there. It seems the newer batches have kind of shifted now, thank goodness, from that alcohol burn to a more of a bold and sweet flavor. And finishes can do that the more you explore. All right, so what's great to do is add a couple drops of water to your whiskey or your bourbon, especially if it's a high proof. See what it does to it. Water, just like air, has a tendency to open up some flavors. I'm gonna add about 5 drops of water to that if you wanna be a little bit scientific. I like using a dropper because you could really kind of gauge exactly how much water is going into the whiskey. Water and air open up flavors in whiskey that were not there before. Does it make it sweeter, more bitter? Does it bring out more fruit or vanilla flavors? So the water in the Stag Junior really opened up some more cherry notes. The cherry that I was getting in here was a little bit masked by some of the brown sugars, but I think the water here has added a little bit more sweetness, a little bit more vanilla is definitely coming out of the glass. Then what you want to do is taste it again. So what the water did to the Stag Junior for me personally, it just brought out a lot of vanilla flavor. I mean, this is basically drinking vanilla extract with a little layer of cherry on top. The finish is still there, but again, it's still sweet, but it definitely changed the whiskey a little bit. But the great thing about adding some water is you could experiment with finding what your perfect proof is, or you could start working your way up to barrel proof. You could start with a known volume of whiskey, say 2 ounces, add small amounts of water to the whiskey until you like the taste and becomes a bit more palatable to find what a comfortable proof is for you. If you want to work your way up to barrel proof, each time you go back, add a little less water to work your way up to barrel proof. Once you develop a routine of what you're tasting, taking notes as you taste different bourbons always helps. Writing down the specific flavors and aromas you get on the nose, palate, and finish can help jumpstart your senses into becoming more sensitive to different bourbons and whiskeys. Now this takes me to my tips of how to train your palate and nose to get better at picking up flavors and aromas and even be able to pick up specific flavor profile from a single distillery. Here are my tips. So when I ask Master Distillers on how to train your palate to become better, I've gotten 3 specific tips that have helped me out. The first one was pretty simple. Pay attention to what you're eating and smelling. More than half the descriptions of my whiskey come from food and desserts that I remember growing up or things I've had recently. Remember, picking up flavors and scents is purely subjective and based on your personal experience only. Now, if I've never had Madagascar vanilla, or if I've never had cinnamon or toffee, my brain isn't going to know what that smells or tastes like to make that connection. So paying attention to the flavors or ingredients and what you're eating can really help in picking up flavors in your whiskey. But if you don't feel like eating a bunch of different foods, the next thing you can do is get a sensory kit. Sensory kits are great for training your senses to pick up different flavors. They help you fine-tune your palate and flavor and scent identification as well. Now, flavors shouldn't be just identified as fruity, but you should want to dig deeper, get berries and even further, get to blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, or whatever the case may be. There are a bunch of available online to purchase that range in different prices. These kits can contain everything from vanilla, caramel, licorice, wheat, nutmeg, rye grain, oak, corn grain, and more. Of course, if you don't want to buy a kit, you can just go to the grocery store or go in your home spice rack and start familiarizing yourself with everything from baking spices to fruits and vegetables. The more you experience and smell, the better off your senses will be. I will leave a list down below in the description of the video of how you can make your own sensory kit to start off with. Lastly, here's a routine I learned to help me pick out specific flavors from different distilleries, which is not only helpful, but it's also a lot of fun. So here I have multiple bottles from Buffalo Trace, all glasses poured. The idea here is to use the same nosing and tasting techniques we talked about and apply them to one singular distillery brand for about a month. However you want to mix up the selections throughout the month is up to you, but as you get to know this one distillery, your palate will start getting used to that one brand, but you will also start picking up the differences in the selection within each brand. So as an example, as I was tasting earlier, the Stag Junior. Now this is a barrel proof bourbon, very high proof. I told you got a lot of cherry on the nose, a lot of deep rich caramels. If you compare it next to Eagle Rare is a lot lighter, it's a little bit sweeter. Eagle Rare is only 90 proof. There's a nice sweetness to it, but it is 10 years old, which is actually a little bit older than the Stag Junior. You definitely smell some barrel char, a little bit of that cherry note is there as well, and then you start thinking, okay, maybe Buffalo Trace has a cherry thing going on. When you taste it next to Blanton's, now Blanton's is a higher rye mash bill from Buffalo Trace, so it's got a little bit more rye grain into it, which definitely differentiates itself from these two here. But there's a lot of great sweetness in there to go along with that citrus spice. So you have some cherry notes in these two, both very sweet. This one again is a little bit more citrusy, but still have that quintessential sweetness. Now you move to the Weller, which is a wheated bourbon. So that replaces the rye altogether and replaces it with wheat. So with Weller Special Reserve, this comes across as definitely softer. You still get those caramels, vanillas, but it's a little bit lighter, a little bit sweeter. This is also 90 proof. But again, like the other three, you get this prominent sweet oak flavor, which is, I think, is the attribute that really sets apart Buffalo Trace from anyone else. But you could find these attributes across all different distilleries when you start tasting them this way. So after a month of drinking the Buffalo Trace, now we're gonna try Four Roses, and you're gonna start to recognize a world of difference between the two brands. For me, Four Roses has a little bit more of a spicy and floral aspect to it. Now when you compare it to Buffalo Trace, which is just so much sweetness, that sweet oak profile, oh, it's so delicious. Yeah, so this is what your palate's been used to. Now we go into Four Roses, and on the nose it's just completely different. This now has more of a spicy characteristic, a little bit more of a rye influence, so you get a little bit more of a rye spice, maybe some citrus, some apricot. Some people say you could get a little bit of a dill note in there as well. And then when you try it, wow, yeah, Four Roses, when you compare, it's just a lot more fruit forward. Definitely a little bit more rye spice, a little bit more rye influence there. Just a world of differences that open up your palate. Now, once you taste all those differences, definitely write them down and either introduce another brand into the mix or start up again for another month before moving on to the next brand. This is definitely a more intense way of tasting and learning about different brands and how their flavor profiles differ from one another. But for me personally, this was the best way for me to learn about each distillery, and I hope for some of you out there it really helps you. All right, everyone, well, thanks for watching this video and tips on how to get better at tasting bourbon and whiskey. Remember, this isn't meant to be strict guidelines, but just some tips that have helped me get a bit more out of the glass and enjoy my whiskey and bourbon to make me a better reviewer. So if you enjoyed the video, please hit that subscribe button below. Also, if you have any tips that have helped you, please leave them down in the comments for some of the readers to see as well. Always love hearing from you. If you haven't yet, find me on Instagram and find me on Twitter. And as I always say, it is not about the whiskey, it's the people you share with. So go pour some bourbon, go pour some whiskey, and get to learning. Cheers. I'll see you next time on the Mash and Drum.